If you're watching this video today, the chances are you're a rugby player that's feeling overlooked. You're putting in the work in the gym, but that hard work that you put in the gym never seems to reflect the performances on the pitch, and deep down, you know you're capable of more. Well, here's the hard truth. Most rugby players are following advice that is holding them back, which is why in this video today, I'm going to be giving you the exact step-by-step framework, the proven system that we use with our athletes at the Strength Solution that allows them to step up and become the go-to player for their team, their club, or even their country. This is for the rugby player who feels stuck. Maybe you haven't had the luxury of being in a pro academy and you're simply waiting for that breakthrough moment. But deep down, you've had setback after setback, but you still know that you have that drive to be that player that you know you can be. As a young lad growing up in Wales, I had one dream, and that was to follow in my grandfather's footsteps and to try and get that Welsh cap everyone said that he deserved. They called him the Gentle Giant. He was a 6'5" behemoth that dominated every pitch that he stepped on. However, there was a problem. I, on the other hand, wasn't dealt the same genetic hand. I was 5'10", sometimes 6 foot on the matchday program, 110 kilos at 14, and to top it off, in school, I started a fat club, which was a group of people that decided to walk whenever there was running involved in the class. Now, let's be fair, that's not dominating anyone on the pitch. I was out of shape and I was doing everything that I could to hide how unfit I was. But everything changed the day I got picked for district. For some people, it was really nothing. But for myself, it was a lifeline and a stepping stone to realize that, shit, this may actually be possible. So that same night, I typed into YouTube how to get better at rugby. There was absolutely nothing related to sports performance out there. So I tried a different search. How to get strong. You look at the rugby players on the pitch, they were all big, they were all strong, like my grandfather, and I thought, maybe that's the route to go down. And I'll be honest, I became obsessed from the very first video that I watched. Every night, without fail, I would stay up watching these YouTube videos and the very next day, head into the gym to put it all to use and experiment with the new things that I'd learned. That year, I saved up all my pocket money and all my birthday money and I put it to use and invested in a gym set. We turned the downstairs into a dingy gym. Every single evening, around 4 to 8 of the rugby lads that we would play with would come down and we would send it. We trained like dogs throughout that summer. Every single kilo mattered. We always wanted to one-up each other, and the record board was the way of showing that. We had a belt for the squat, the bench, and the deadlift, and if you hit the big gym record that week, you would be in charge of that, and that was gospel. Those late nights where we would spend hours and hours and hours training started to pay off. We got the call up for the Dragons under 16s, and then we made it into the Dragons under 18s. And this was a massive turning point for us because this was the first time that we actually had elite level S&C. We trained like athletes. We didn't just train for strength. We trained for speed. We trained for power. We trained for explosiveness. We built a robust conditioning base. And with the foundation of strength that I built up, I took it all in like a sponge. And eventually, I hit the peak. I got the call up for the Wales under 20s. Truth be told, it wasn't because I was the most talented or the most genetically gifted, because I was far from it. It was simply because I was physically prepared. Now, sadly, my time with the 20s didn't go as planned. I pulled the jersey on for 2 friendlies, and I stayed with the squad for the whole 6 Nations, but I never managed to make my test debut. It was a killer blow because I was this close from following through on that dream that I set at the age of 13 when I first laced my boots up for the first time. And all it made me think was, where could I have been if I had access to the elite level S&C that I did at the age of 18 from when I very first started? And that is why I made the decision to shift my entire career to S&C, to help build athletes that I wish I could have been. And this is exactly what this comprehensive guide is here to do. This is that video that I wish I could have stumbled on when I first started to search on YouTube how to get better at rugby. This is going to be the full roadmap for you to become the player that the coach can't ignore. Not just strong, not just the powerlifter, but the athlete that's ready to step up when they need to. I know you may be thinking, why should I listen to this video? Well, this is the exact framework that we use with Danielle. Now, Danielle is someone that we would describe as a fringe player. She was there or thereabouts. She was always in contention, but she was never quite making that step up to becoming that breakthrough player. And it was because she'd always have a few holes in her game. Scrummaging was one of them. But when she joined the program 4 months later, she was able to get the opportunity to represent Bristol Bears in the cup competition that they were playing in. And in her very first training session, she showed how physically ready she was, and she felt like she fitted in, and she was able to stay with the Bristol Bears for that cup competition. Then we've got James. James is one of our longest standing clients at the Strength Solution, and he represented Dragons under 16s, but he never made that breakthrough to the Dragons under 18s where he got exposed to that pro contract. So training like an athlete had escaped him, and it was showing in his performances. His body comp wasn't where it needed to be, and he was dropping off tackles, and he didn't really have the engine that he needed to make that impact. But 4 years on, following this framework, he's now playing 4 divisions higher than when he first started, and he is playing lights out week in, week out with continual team of the week performances week in, week out. And then we've got Brian. Brian was one of the hardest workers on his team. He may be in a similar position to yourself where he's following the generic advice from the S&C, or he's following blanket programs online, and no matter how hard you work, how much effort you put in, how much progress you make in the gym, you just can't seem to transfer that to on the pitch performances. Now for Brian, this was make or break. He was chasing a pro contract, and he wanted to make sure that he could step up, and he joined the Strength Solution, and he's done exactly that. He has been able to sign his first pro contract following the methods that we're going to give you today. Finally, we'll bring you to Ziggy to round this one off, because Ziggy has been able to get his first international cap and do the thing that I wish I was able to do following these methods. This is the exact framework that you need no matter where you're starting from. Now let's talk about what Danielle, James, Brian, and Ziggy all had in common, because I know it's the thing that a lot of you are doing right now. You're maybe going on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube. You are scrolling through, whether it's strength, speed, conditioning. Maybe some days you're following a powerlifting program. The next, you're feeling a little bit unfit. You'll throw a CrossFit WOD in, and you're just compiling all these bits of information together, and you're trying to make a congruent training week. This is what I call the train hard and hope strategy. But I hate to break it to you, hope isn't a strategy. Hope doesn't get you picked, it doesn't get you fitter, it doesn't get you faster, it doesn't get you stronger. Which means hope doesn't make you the first name on the team sheet week in, week out. The good news, it's not genetics, it's not luck, it's simply a system. And step 1 of that system is you need to reset your mindset. Now, I know what you may be thinking, another woo-woo mindset section, but the biggest thing that I see athletes holding them back is the time frames they think of things in. There's a phrase that I like to use with athletes that come on board. Most people overestimate how much they can get done in a week or a month, but they underestimate how much they can get done over years. And that is the first thing that you need to realize. Because the truth is, you won't notice a difference after one session. You're not going to notice a difference after 5, 10, 20. But when you start stacking hundreds of wins over your training, your nutrition, your recovery, your lifestyle habits, and all these compound together, that's when the magic starts to happen. Which is why the first framework that I want you to utilize is the 3x3 method. Now, we've stolen this one from Dane Miller over at Garage Strength because it holds true. The first goal that you should have as an athlete is you want to hit 3 hours a week for 1 week. The next goal, you want to hit 3 hours a week for 3 weeks. The next goal, 3 hours a week for 3 months. Then you want to hit 3 hours a week for all 3 parts of the season, the off-season, the pre-season, and the in-season. And then finally, you want to hit 3 hours a week for 3 years, because that is how high performance is built. The issue with this, most people stop at step 2. Some may make it to step 3, and then they just go, it's not working. What's the point in this? But the truth is, it is working. They have just massively underestimated how long they need to do this thing for. Because if they was to stick it out to step 4 and make it all the way to step 5, they would be completely unrecognizable to the coaches, but most importantly, to themselves. This isn't about motivation. This is about making your self-development as a player a non-negotiable. You want to be the go-to? Start acting like it and stack your 3s. Now that you understand the time frames that you need to think in, and you've got that 3x3 method and those goals that you need to tick off for step 1 to step 5, the next job is about, where do I spend those 3 hours a week? And this is where the next phrase I like to use is, if you're not assessing, you're guessing as an athlete. You see, every professional athlete out there will undergo a series of testing routinely throughout the course of the season, and it's not just for gathering data, it's for gathering clarity. Clarity on exactly where you need to spend your time, effort, and energy to level up as a player. The goal isn't simply activity when it comes to your training, it's accomplishment. That is exactly why we've created the player performance profile at the Strength Solution. The player performance profile has 8 tests, and these 8 tests have been designed to target your core 4. Now, these are going to be the biggest levers that we need to crank when it comes to your athletic development. We're going to be looking at strength, explosiveness, speed, and conditioning. You see, each test we've selected in the player performance profile has been backed by the research to show us our biggest predictors of rugby performance. For our maximal strength work, we're going to be looking at our back squat and our bench press scores. When it comes to our explosiveness, we're going to be looking at the power clean, we're going to be looking at the Abercrombie jump, we're going to be looking at the drop jump. Then when it comes to our speed, we're going to be looking at our max V data, and when we're going to be looking at our conditioning, we're going to be looking at our mass score. And one of the other things that we'll track outside of that is going to be our body composition, which is going to have an effect on all other areas of the core 4. And they're going to be the 8 tests that you need to run to establish exactly what you need to work on this season. So you've just completed your testing, you've got the data, you've got your back squat score, you've got your 10-meter sprint time, you've got your mass score, and you're just sat there thinking, well, now what? Which is why we've created the Driven to Dog framework that we utilize with our athletes. Essentially, this framework allows us to turn that data that we've got into actionable progress for us to chase and unlock as we go through our athletic journey. Truthfully, this is just a way to gamify our training and make it more enjoyable, because if I spent half the amount of time that I did playing Call of Duty on this athletic development stuff when I first started, I think my career would have looked a little bit different. But one of the things that I did learn from playing all those games was that every single game had levels. They had unlocks. They had a progression pathway that you could take your character on. And I want you to view your training as the same. Now, if you've ever played Call of Duty, you get 100 headshots, you get the lovely red tiger camo, you get all the camos and all the guns, you get the gold. And we've brought that same level system into our training to just give athletes targets to work towards and unlock specific training methods that are going to be useful for them at that point in time. Our Driven to Dog framework takes your data and places you in one of 6 levels for each of the physical attributes that we're looking at. It starts off at foundations and finishes off at dog. Each level of the Driven to Dog framework is based on the research, the benchmarks, and my years and years of experience coaching a variety of different athletes from all standards across all positions. So how do I access the Driven to Dog framework? Well, the first step, you've got to go to the description below and you've got to download the free Google Sheet that we have created, which is going to allow you to follow along as we go through this. The second step, you need to pick your archetype, because truth be told, your position determines your priority. You do not need to squat 2.5 times body weight as a winger, but as a front row forward that needs to go into scrums, it may be super valuable. So the archetype will essentially alter the standard that we have got for level 0 to level 6, and that is going to allow you to personalize your journey and actually pick the priority things that are going to be the most impactful for your position. Then the final step, you just need to plug your scores into the tracker for all 8 of the lifts. You need to understand where your strengths are. You need to understand where your weaknesses are, because a chain is only as strong as its weakest link. So if you've got a 2.5 times bodyweight back squat, but your mass score is only level 1, well, guess what? You're probably not going to be able to get around the park and effectively use that strength base that you've got for the full 80 minutes. So you've got a weakness that you need to go work on. And that is what this is for, is to give you clarity on what you need to work on right now. But most importantly, give you clarity on what you need to work on next. Because remember, we don't guess, we don't hope. That's not a strategy. This is a clear-cut framework that you can use to step up and understand what your next goals need to be. So now you've got 3 things locked in. You've got a new mindset, you've got a testing battery that you have run through, which means that you should have your strengths and weaknesses off the back of that. But this is where most people get trigger happy. They go on Instagram, they start searching up what the pros are doing for that specific weakness they've got. They may jump into this thing because it looks a little bit cool, or this thing's pulled their attention. But what they fail to realize is that the program that you're on right now is only as good as the one that follows it. Which is why step 4 of this step-by-step framework is you need to build your annual roadmap. Because if we go back to that 3x3 framework, you'll realize that step 4 of that was you need to show up 3 hours a week for all 3 parts of the season. So you need to understand not only what you're doing right now, but what is going to come in the off-season, pre-season, in-season, depending on what phase you're currently in right now. Because each of those phases brings a new demand on your body, your time, and your focus. So if you want to stay consistent across all 3, you're going to need a plan that adapts with you and periodizes throughout the year to give you what you need when you need it. Because understanding where you're at in your season gives you clarity on what matters most right now, but most importantly, what is to come. And at the Strength Solution, we break down your training year into 5 distinct phases. Phase 1 is going to be the off-season, and this is going to be where there's a maximum focus on development. Why? Because rugby stress is at its lowest. There is no pressure to perform on the pitch. So essentially, we can use the off-season to throw all your eggs in the athlete development basket and become the best athlete possible. Phase 2 is going to be the pre-season. Now, this time is where rugby stress is still quite low. You're starting to integrate into more team sessions, and by the end of pre-season, you need to be at a point where you can play a full 80-minute game of rugby. So we need to make sure that we're switching a little bit of the focus in this phase. We want to try and go from more general qualities in that off-season block to a little bit more of those sport-specific qualities in the pre-season block. The next phase is going to be your first in-season phase, and that is normally going to be from September to December. And this is going to be where your rugby fatigue is at its lowest. You haven't had the luxury of getting into a car crash weekend after weekend and racking up collisions at this point. So you can still push training a little bit more before we move into phase 4, which is going to be your in-season block 2. At this point, you would have already played a handful of games. The stress on your body is rising and rising. The niggles that you'll get in week after week keep showing up. And at this point, it's not about thriving. It's about surviving and putting your best performances on for the business end of the season. And once all those 4 phases are done, you're going to need a 5th phase, which is what we call our transition phase, which is essentially dropping all that stress that we've accumulated throughout the course of the season and then building and reacclimatizing to some higher volumes before we move into year 2 of the off-season. Now, each of these phases are what we call macrocycles, and they form the foundation for everything that we program. So instead of just going on your saved folder and smashing a load of sessions together and hoping for the best, we use these 5 phases, which we call macrocycles, to form the foundation of your programming throughout the entire training year. This way, you're actually training with purpose, structure, and that long-term plan that is going to allow you to move through the 3x3 framework with ease. Now, at the time of releasing this video, we are currently entering our off-season macro cycle. So if you've been sat wondering, all this theory stuff is great, Joel, how do I start to apply this into a program that makes sense? Well, we're going to start to do that now. When the preseason comes, there will be a video covering all the steps, like I said, on how to transition these general qualities that we're building into more sport-specific stuff. But let's dive into the off-season and teach you exactly how to build this macro cycle. Now, I'll be honest, the off-season is my favorite time of year because I have seen it. One singular off-season can change the trajectory of your entire career. You get 3 to 4 months of undistracted training time that you can dedicate to becoming the best athlete possible without the worry of sacrificing your performances on the weekend. Essentially, this window of time is your time where you can separate yourself from the rest. If you get it wrong, though, you find yourself in the same position year after year saying, next year is going to be my year. Now, those rugby players waste their off seasons by making this one mistake that I've seen. They go all in on that one area, but they completely neglect the rest. They want to gain muscles, so they go over to C-Bum's Instagram. They start copying some of the workouts that he's doing to try and gain a little bit more muscle. Maybe they want to get strong. They know they're a little bit weak, so they go over to Russell O'Hee's Instagram, and then they start copying his powerlifting programs and just neglecting any time on the pitch. Or they want to get a little bit fit. They see old Kipchoge breaking 2, and they think, you know what, this running stuff's for me. They buy a pair of Alpha Flies, they start caning park runs, but they don't do actually any strength work. Now, the issue isn't that dedicating the time to that program isn't going to help that area, because no one's arguing that C-Bum is going to win the bodybuilding contest. Russ Swole is going to win the powerlifting contest, and Kipchoge is smashing them all in a 5K. But the issue is all of those are getting cooked on the pitch. Because rugby isn't about being good at one thing, it's about being good at everything at the same time. So this brings us on to rule 1 of step number 5 of building your mesocycle. If it's important, it never leaves the program. Yes, we want to use this time to plug the deficit on your biggest weakness, but not at the expense of everything else. Strength, speed, explosiveness, conditioning, these all need to be in your program year round. But the problem is this poses its own set of challenges. And here's the catch. If you train equally at everything, you'll improve nothing. So let's break this down with a visual analogy. Picture you've got 4 cups in front of you. You've got strength, speed, explosiveness, and conditioning. And you've got another cup which represents your adaptation energy with a finite amount of water in it. Now, if you pour a little bit of that adaptation energy into each of those cups, you never truly fill one. You never reach that point of overload that's needed for you to actually develop. Now, this is how most athletes stay stuck, spinning their wheels, not actually making any progress. And this is why rule number 2 of building a macrocycle is development versus stimulation. And if you understand this concept, it is the concept that separates busy training from productive training. Because while you can train everything, you can't develop everything at once. So how do you know what athletic qualities you need to develop versus stimulate? Well, good news for you. That was step 2 and step 3 of this video, the player performance profile and the driven to dog framework. If you've completed that, you understand what your lowest hanging fruit is. And remember, a chain is only as strong as its weakest link. So this lowest hanging fruit is going to have the most meaningful impact on your performance. And that is going to be the quality that you emphasize and develop throughout the course of a training block. You're then going to pick a secondary KPI that supports that, which is also going to be held at a development capacity. Everything else in the program just stays at that stimulation volume, just enough to tick over block by block. And this is where we start to bucket athletes in our program based on their limiting factors. If you're someone that's slow off the mark, well, you may focus on acceleration and lower body strength. They're going to be your 2 development qualities. The rest, you can just take over. If you're someone that continually gets gassed in games and you don't have the capacity to last 80 minutes, well, you're going to focus more on conditioning as a development quality and maybe repeat sprint ability as that secondary quality. You can see that throughout this, there are going to be various different types of players. And if you're someone like myself who was super strong, but very slow off the mark, and you didn't have that because of the powerlifting background that you had, well, you're going to focus on max velocity and reactive strength elements of your explosive continuum. This is how we ensure every program is intentional, and that is why each quality has its place in a program and why the best off-season programs are balanced but biased towards the limiting factor and the biggest needle mover for your performances on the pitch. Now you've mapped out your macrocycle, we're moving on to step 5. So far, when it comes to your periodization and program design, we've got the annual plan, we've mapped out the macrocycle, we've built the mesocycle, and now our job is to build the microcycle. Because one of the questions that we get quite frequently is, what is the best training split for a rugby player? And this is where we take a leaf out of Charlie Francis's book. Now, Charlie Francis was one of the greats in the strength and conditioning world, and he was one of the first people to popularize the high-low training method, because one of his core principles was you can only go to the well so many times. So you need to understand when to dig deep, but most importantly, when to pull back. And one of his beliefs was that quality, well-executed, high-intense work needed periods of sufficient recovery if you wanted to adapt to the training stimulus, which is the goal of all training. It's not just to get through and survive, it's to actually get the positive adaptation, which is going to lead to performance improvements. And the same applies to rugby players in the off-season. I hate to break it to you, you cannot run at max speed, grind heavy weight, and lift with max intent every single day. Your nervous system is just going to flatline, and you're not going to actually get the training stimulus and the adaptation off the back of it, which means you don't actually improve your performances on the pitch. You just do work for the sake of work. So when we're building your microcycle, we're just going to simply rotate high stress days with low stress days to manage fatigue and balance our recovery so we can adapt and make incremental changes week on week to our performance. So what actually counts as a high stress activity versus a low stress? Well, your high stress activities are going to be anything that taxes the nervous system to a great degree. I want you thinking sprints, heavy lifts, max jumps, anaerobic work, and hard conditioning. The low stress sessions are just going to be things that build capacity. Think your aerobic work, your bodybuilding work, mobility, light agility, all that sub-max lifting, which you can go into the gym, and even if you're a little bit beaten up, a little bit sore, more often than not, you come off the back of those sessions feeling a little bit better rather than worse. Whereas if you just stack high days back to back, your quality is just going to drop. You're not going to be able to come into the session and give it the intent that it needs to actually get the adaptation that you want. And you're just going to be digging yourself deeper in the well with no way out without taking weeks off training. And that is why the training split is so important. So I'm going to be giving you 3 rules that you need to follow when designing the high-low split that works for your specific weaknesses. Rule number 1, you need to have 48 hours between high-stress activities. Rule number 2, you need to try and limit yourself to 3 high days a week, because that's going to satisfy rule number 1, but it's also going to not overload yourself over the course of a mesocycle. And rule number 3, if you need to break one of those rules, for example, you need to do 2 back-to-back days, you're just going to need to give yourself longer time to recover. But try not to break rules 1 and 2 in the same microcycle. But remember, this is the ideal, and very rarely do we have the ideal situation. Things pop up. We are not pro athletes. We don't have the luxury of having our schedules managed. We may have kids. We may have work stress. We may have other things pop up. So remember, the most optimal thing is the work gets done. Remember, compliance is the science. So if you need to break some rules every now and then to get the job done, that is going to be the most important thing for you to step up your performances. Now you understand the why behind the high-low formula and what activities belong where. The next question you need to ask yourself is simply, how many days a week do you want to train this off-season? Now, for our athletes, as a guideline, we aim for anywhere from 3 to 6 sessions a week, and we're going to rotate through 6 different sessions. We're going to have a lower body strength and power session, a upper body strength and power session, an impulse day. We're then going to have an athlete day, and then we're going to have a hypertrophy day. If you're on a condensed microcycle of maybe 2 to 3 sessions a week, we will start to look at full body sessions in place of the upper and lower sessions. So they're going to be the 6 sessions that we roll through. And I could give you every single set, every single rep, but let's be real, we would be here longer than that one game where France played Wales and scrummed to the 100th minute. So what I have done is I have compiled a list of all the microcycles that we use with our athletes, the most successful ones, the ones that bring the best results, and I've put them together in a document that you can download for free and essentially plug and play for the limiting factors that you've got so you can develop without worrying about all the guesswork. Now, full transparency, these aren't going to be full programs with sets, reps, and exercises built in, because that is going to be the next steps of this video, because that is an individualized aspect as well. But these are going to be plug-and-play skeletons you can customize and schedule for your training week. Think of it as your off-season split done for you. So now I think it's a perfect time to just reflect a little bit and make sure that we're fully up to speed with everything that we've got. Because if you're not, you need to click back and do that, because step 6 isn't going to be as effective without the other steps in place. So what we should have right now is we should have a new mindset reframe with a 3x3 framework. We then should have our player performance profile completed, which is going to give us a snapshot as to where we are. After that, we have then put that into our Driven to Dawg framework and established our athlete levels. We've then built the annual plan. We've built the macrocycle. We've built the mesocycle. We've got our microcycle. And now it's about our session design. Because the lifts you choose to do, the range you choose to work in, the sets you choose, either moves the needle or wastes your time. Now, it doesn't matter what session that you do. All sessions we build at The Strength Solution follow the RTS framework. Now, this framework has been built around 3 specific rules that allow us to get the most out of our session. Rule number 1, it starts with the most high priority activity and finishes with the least. Rule number 2, it starts with the most complex activity and finishes with the more simple. And rule number 3, it starts with the most high CNS, neural demanding activities and finishing with the least. That way, every single part of your session can be given the intent needed to move the needle. So let's break each section down so you know exactly what needs to go in it. Block 1 is going to be your readiness, and this is essentially going to be your prep to lift stuff. This isn't going to be about sitting on a foam roller, spending 20-30 minutes rolling out every body part. It is going to be targeted prep work. It is going to be exercises that you need to work on that is going to double up with some extra robustness work, which we'll cover, but essentially things that don't detract from the main KPI of that day, whether it be speed, strength, or explosiveness. Block 2 is going to be our reactive or our speed work if needed. If we have a day that has an emphasis of the explosive or speed work, think impulse or athlete day, this is where we're going to go next, where our CNS is most fresh. This is where we're going to work on our elastic, reactive, and max speed qualities with great movement intent. Block 3 is going to be our technical coordination block, and this is going to be our conventional based power training. Think of this as the moving heavyish weights relatively fast. Now, we're going to be utilizing a snatch, clean, jerk, or a derivative of these movements to move with skill and efficiency and get a very, very potent explosive strength stimulus. Block 4 is going to be our strength work, and we're going to split this into relative strength, which is going to be strength work, which is going to target that CNS a little bit more, and then we've got our absolute strength, which is going to be more hypertrophy-based movements. So in our relative strength category, we want this to be our key KPI lifts that we're trying to drive up. Our absolute strength category is going to maybe pick exercise that target the weaknesses that we have in those lifts or in general from the injuries or any of the movement deficiencies that we've got. And then finally, we are then going to round things off with our robustness work, which is going to be our injury prevention stuff. We're going to look at the key injury areas for the sport and for yourself, and we're just going to work those with light weights, and we're going to get high quality movement, just building that tissue tolerance. So how does this differ session to session? Well, on athlete days, you'll spend more time in that readiness, reactive, and speed section. On lower body strength and power days, you're going to be doing a lot more relative strength and absolute strength work than you would speed work. And each day has a different emphasis, and which one that you need to pick in your microcycle is dependent on the limiting factors that you've got. So now you understand what comes in each block. The next job is to pick which exercises are going to be best suited for you and your needs. And that is why we use a 3-tier exercise selection model, which is going to allow you to do that. So the first layer of exercise selection that we're going to be looking at are the tier 1 exercises. Now, these are going to be the KPI drivers, and essentially, these are going to be the movements that drive the main emphasis goal that we have for that session. And these exercises are going to be the ones that provide the biggest return on investment from our training time perspective. And essentially, all the other tiers of movement are just going to be picked based on supporting this goal to the best ability. So the exercises that belong in this category are going to be the Rugby 10. They're going to be the back squat, the front squat, the deadlift, the clean, the snatch, the bench, the dip, the chin, the overhead press, and the incline press. These are going to be the 10 relative and absolute strength exercises that belong in that tier 1 category. We're then also going to have our max sprints and our fly sprints in this category. We're also going to have our technical coordination work, and we're going to have our ping tier plyos. This is going to be the tier 1 exercises, and if you can only do these exercises, these will be the ones that you pick. And if you are limited on time in a training week, these are the exercises that you're going to pick because they will provide the biggest return. The next tier of exercises that we're going to be looking at are what we consider our tier 2 exercises and our KPI builders. These are going to be the exercises that we pick that have a direct transfer to the main KPI driver. For example, if you're someone that struggles with sprint technique and max V, wicket sprints are going to be in here. These could be things like sled sprints that are going to directly support acceleration, or they could be glute ham raises for someone that really struggles building that posterior chain strength. These aren't just random guesswork, they're strategic builders. And then tier 3 is going to be any exercise that didn't satisfy the first 2 criteria. Think of this like your robustness work, where we're working on joint control, end range stability, tissue tolerance. Those things for the more remedial based muscles all belong in that tier 3 section. So when you're building your session, don't just ask yourself what looks cool right now. Ooh, what's flavor of the month? What's that next influencer posted? Ask yourself 3 questions. Number 1, what is going to be the KPI driver for myself that's going to build and support that quality that I'm looking to target? Then ask yourself, what are going to be the movements that best support my progress in this lift? And then third question, ask yourself, what are some of the lifts that I maybe need to do that are going to allow me to do tier 1 and tier 2 exercises for as long as I need to get the goal? That is how you pick exercise selection, and that is how you make sure that every exercise has its purpose. Now that we've got the exercises that we're going to use, what you need to realize is that every result from those exercises, whether it be strength, speed, explosiveness, or conditioning, comes down to two things: volume and intensity. Volume simply means how much work you're doing, and intensity means how intense that is relative to your best. So whether this be your top speed or your best ever lift. Now, most rugby players will fuck up the balance of this in one of four ways. Way number one, high volume and high intensity. This may be great for a developmental quality, but if this is your only approach for every single physical quality that you've got on board your program, you're going to run the risk of burning out. The second way is low volume and low intensity. You're just wasting your time. You then may fall into the camp of doing high intensity with low volume. And like I said, this may be perfect for a stimulation quality, but if that's what every single quality in your program looks like, you're not going to have enough exposure to the emphasis of that program, which means you're not going to get the results off the back of it. The worst scenario you can be in is high volume, low intensity. You are just doing junk reps because you're not going to get the adaptation that you want because there's no intensity behind it. So striking the balance between volume and intensity is going to be key if you want to drive progress. Now, what you need to realize when you're selecting volume and intensity, there are prescription guidelines out there that are backed by the research that allow you to just fast track the guesswork. And it's called the 1RM Continuum. And it's something that we use with our athletes. And it's essentially a cheat code to their best performances because they know exactly what volume and what intensity they need to work at things. Relative strength and power is going to be roughly 85 to 100% of your max, and that's going to be 1 to 5 reps. Again, for the sake of time, I'm not going to run through every single volume prescription that we should look at. I'm simply going to give you access to a 1RM Continuum cheat sheet that you can download below and understand exactly what volumes and intensities you need to be working at for each section. But here's a quick few examples to give you a better understanding of this. If you want to build real, robust power, you're not going to be doing it in the 12 rep range with 70% of your 1 rep max. That is going to be best maximized in the 1 to 5 rep range, around 85 to 100% of your max. If you want to build some real tissue tolerance and build up some muscle size and you're working twos, you're going to be shooting yourself in the foot. So head to the description, download our cheat sheet, and this is going to allow you to understand how to populate the sets and rep section of your training cycle that you downloaded previously. God, I'm good to you. Whew. So we're nearing the end of this mammoth video. You've got the sets, the reps, the exercises, the intensity that you need to work at, the training split, the mesocycle, the macrocycle. We've even got an annual plan, and you've got a date in your diary to come back to this channel when the preseason comes so you can follow along and do the same for this next macro cycle of training. The final thing that we're going to need to talk about is how we're going to progress this over time, and that is where the theory of progressive overload comes in, and that is something that you're going to need to apply to your training if you want to carry on getting results for the full 8 to 12 week off season, because every single training phase, every single training block needs an extra way of adding more stimulus as we get throughout the duration of it to make sure that that training program is still effective. As a wise man once said, Chad Wesley Smith, smart training is hard training. So we need to find a way to make our training both hard and smart, and that is where progressive overload comes in. So your role throughout your training isn't to just add more sets, more reps, more volume, and bury yourself into the ground. It is to ask yourself these 3 questions. What quality am I looking to develop? What kind of overload will best facilitate progressions in that? And how can I track this is working over time? So if you're looking to push your strength throughout the program, you should be looking to drive this up with intensity. One of the ways that you can track this is with your estimated 1 rep max. You should keep track of the weights that you're lifting throughout the course of a block, and you should know that that weight is getting heavier. If you hit 100 kilos for 3 reps one day, 105 for 3 the next, you've made progress. But if you've hit 95 for 6, have you made progress? Yes, you have, because the estimated 1 rep max has gone up. So you need to make sure that you're finding a way to progress this number over time. If you're looking to put on more size and build that muscle mass, then you're going to want to try and make sure that you're keeping intensity super high. We want to be making sure that we're hitting effective reps every single session, and you want to increase the amount of work that you do of those things over time. Whether it's more sets, more reps, more time and attention, you want to try and find ways to build your tissue tolerance, your work capacity, and your muscle size along with it. If you're looking to improve your speed and power, you want to make sure that you are refining your sprint shapes. You are building that technique. You're working on that reactivity and how you contact with that ground. So ground contact times should be coming down in your plyometrics. The amount of jump height that you're getting on those plyometrics should be coming up. You should be running faster. That is how you're going to measure improvements in speed and power. And when it comes to your conditioning, you need to make sure that you're finding ways to run faster, for longer, with less rest. That is the goal of conditioning. But the biggest mistake that I want you to avoid when it comes to progressive overload is not doing too much, too soon, too frequently. That is how injuries occur. We do too much that the body cannot tolerate for too long, and it starts to break down. So make sure that you're aiming for 2 to 4% increases on a week-to-week basis of whatever metrics that you're tracking to make sure that you can really get the most out of a progressive long-term plan. And that right there is a step-by-step guide to becoming a totally unrecognizable athlete this off-season. We covered exactly how to build a mindset that is capable of high performance and the time frames needed with the 3x3 framework. We then established exactly where you're at with the player performance profile and where that ranks in our Driven to Dog framework. We then built the annual map all the way down to the finest detail of sets, reps, and intensity needed for every single exercise in that program. If you follow the steps in this video, I have no doubt that you're going to have the best off season yet. And essentially, when I sat down to create this video, I wanted to make sure that this video left no stone unturned when it came to exactly what you need to step up as an athlete. And I wish this was the video that I stumbled across when I first started this journey at the age of 14, because I think that Welsh cap may have looked a little bit different. Now is on you to show up and execute and do the work that you need to. So if you're serious about getting ahead this offseason, you've got two choices. Number one, follow all the steps in this video and implement them with high intensity and effort. Or number two, head to the description and then inquire about the waitlist for the academy, where we take everything that we've done in this video and run this for you. So you have to do zero thinking and you just need to worry about training and showing up and giving intent. Because here's the truth. You won't always get to choose when your opportunity is, but you can choose whether you're prepared for it. So go make it happen.